community activist, neighborhood builder, and avid community gardener. This is Say It in Your Own Words, the monthly show. Thank you for being here, Hatch.
Well, thank you for having me, Sharon.
And I've seen you around Area 4 with a cart of gardening tools and working on the sidewalks. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Is that? Okay. What I do is I try to think of the streets as something that we tend. I've been a gardener for a living, and it's grown on me as I saw the streets where I lived with trash and weeds that, gee, these really could be gardens too, that we share. And so I began to pull weeds out of tree wells and along the cracks and so on, with the idea that it would leave a good feeling in my spirit and maybe other people's spirits in the community. So I kept on going, and I realized that this is also a community building activity, that when we share responsibility for our sidewalks, we build a good feeling of community.
So it's not just in front of your own house. You go
with my cart. Oh,
yes.
And let me say, the cart, I didn't start with a cart.
Okay.
I started with just me and a handful of tools and a bucket. And in fact, I had to carry my tools and the stuff in the bucket to throw away so that I didn't leave anything behind, because maybe somebody would walk off with it. But then somebody kept seeing me on the streets and volunteered to make the wagon. So that's another chipping in on the part of the community. A guy who's a carpenter that lives on Boardman Street, which is where I live, took a child's wagon, and he had a metal saw and bolts and built a frame that's enough for 6 good, wallboard buckets worth and tools, and built it and put the frame on top of the wagon, and now I have ever so much of an easier time getting around. Although I still need to build some brackets and hooks to put the long-handled tools on, and it's almost embarrassing how clumsy that can be sometimes, but it helps a lot.
It's a provisioned wagon.
And it's a community contribution too, though. That's the beauty of it too.
Now, where do you decide to work when you have the wagon? Do you run into people that want you to beautify in front of their house, or how does that go?
Well, yes. I now have probably encountered, 8 or 10 people who want to or already have now planted flowers. They may have helped me also pull weeds. And now, even under the street light, 4 or 5 days ago, there's one guy, Terrence, who works many, many paint jobs. He's busy. And now it's 4 o'clock when it gets dark.
Right.
So how do you get people out except on precious weekends?
Right.
Well, I called and finally made a connection with him, and it was night, but he had time. And I said, well, do you have a street light out front? And he said, he went. I said, wait a minute, I have to go check. Yep. So he goes out, and on Columbia Street, and the street light is sufficient. So I said, I'll be right over. So I come over with my wagon, and we work underneath his tree, and he plants about 16, 18 bulbs, learning how to do it right there. So even at nighttime, rain or shine, sometimes even in the rain. But so yeah, it's a thing that is individually spreading. And I've noticed sometimes when I walk down the street, say down Columbia Street or maybe Cherry Street or something, that weeds have been pulled, and I think, I didn't do that. So maybe somebody else has chipped in.
Right.
And that it spreads. And then maybe somebody's property that had been kind of weedy is less weedy now. So I think it builds community. Hopefully kind of a contagion that comes from the heart. Because we did this, ourselves.
And have you always been a gardener?
Yes. Well, no. I started in the mid-'80s. And we had rent control, and we were a little bit secure. We were able to be secure in our homes. And I started gardening on the premises up Harvard Street. And then I screened the soil because there was glacial till and glass, and a 1928 medicine bottle, which is a good find, and an Indian head penny. But anyway, and then the kids had a blast participating in the soil screening, and then we planted a wildflower garden. And then neighbors start asking me if I'd like to work gardening for them.
Mhm.
So and then it turned into two things. Well, for me, it turned into a business doing gardening. And I went to school to learn about gardening after I got really inspired.
Oh, where did you go to school?
Mass Bay Community College.
Okay.
They have a horticultural program.
Very good.
Turns out I got the last year before budget cuts. Took that away too. But other people around the neighborhood were planting flowers on their apartment buildings. And then you could also notice that sometimes people do it in the sidewalks.
Mhm.
And they build little, right under the trees.
In the wells, and you recommend
wells.
putting a little fence, a tiny fence, so that don't get stepped on, and people
Well,
walk around it and go single file when they're near the wells,
There's
right?
some really interesting details about this. First of all, that's true. If you put a little fence, a plastic fence with little legs,
Mhm.
people mostly respect it. And also, if you're just putting your recyclables and your trash out there, you need to remind yourself
Right.
that something's growing here sometimes if you're in a hurry. But it works. Now, the interesting thing is that the handicapped access laws require 3 feet of sidewalk. So we have to make sure, there are some sidewalks in neighborhood 4, like Pine Street, that are really narrow.
Mhm.
So there's one tree well, for example, that a neighbor and I may screen, which is less than 3 feet on the pavement part.
Right.
So we need to add some bricks, or the city would need to make it so it's fully 3 feet. And we still have a little strip
Okay.
to plant the
So
flowers.
they mean 3 feet in terms of the concrete, so that the well doesn't stick out into.
Right, so that people who are
where the wheelchair
disabled
would
or
go. Okay.
they can always get by.
Okay.
And also, we also have to give just plain old walking room.
Mhm.
Because if you look down Columbia Street, you'll see, for example, 75 Columbia, where one of the sidewalk gardeners, Chandra and Rita and Mameen, planted flowers, and they filled the tree well, and there was more than 3 feet on the sidewalk.
Mhm.
But still, chomp, 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 chomp. The ones on the sidewalk side got squished.
Okay.
But the ones on the street were gorgeous.
Yes.
So we kind of are thinking about the traffic patterns and trying to adapt
Mhm.
to be successful.
Right.
So everybody's happy.
Adapt the planting and maybe adapt the wells, right?
Right. And
Yes.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So have you done any non-urban gardening, or have you've always been an urban gardener?
I guess, well, community gardening.
Mhm.
Cambridge has 13 community gardens.
Mhm.
It's city-owned land. There's a program where residents can sign up and for no fee, but following some reasonable rules, garden a plot. In our case, at Squirrel Brand on Boardman Street, it's about 9 feet by 9 feet. And I participate in that, building a compost operation. And there is a waiting list, and I'm on the waiting list still.
Wow.
So I have one, but people who are willing to split a plot have 4 little subplots, 9 by 9, and I'm one of those.
And what are some of the things that they grow there?
In the urban gardens, we've got. Okay.
With all the
I
time
thought.
not been visible here. My goodness.
Okay.
Okay.
That's what I was saying before. The urban gardens are. Some things we grow there. Tomatoes for sure, because they taste like candy, or they're just delicious compared to what you get at the store. Beans, zucchini, basil, and other spices. Some people grow arugula, and one person has even got a cold frame that has a heat sensor in the, and so when the temperature goes down and up, the window will open, so it doesn't get too hot inside.
So high tech stuff sometimes.
Well, actually, sometimes the heat sensor is a simple little thing that reacts to heat. I don't know how it
Okay.
works, but
Okay.
it's fun. And that same guy, by the way, another community contribution to sidewalk gardening
Mhm.
was he helped build 2 soil screens. A soil screen is simply a couple of 2x4s put together, and a screen 1/2-inch mesh
Mhm.
is latched down onto it. And that enables you to, say, a tree well, and I've talked to the city folks because we cooperate. If you dig out to get rid of all the stones, buried trash, glass, dangerous stuff, you dig it out and screen it through the mesh, and you get gorgeous soil.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of times a plant doesn't really care if there's debris in there.
Right.
But kids and planters and people who might be invited to do it in future years would appreciate a soil that you can work more
Mhm.
easily.
Mhm.
So I've been doing that, and I even got help from 3 people You know, naming, we did a tree well at Broadway in Norfolk. We did a tree well at 9 Boardman Street and others.
Now, what are some good plants for the tree wells?
Well, all manner of bulbs, which are going in right now.
Okay.
And by the way,
And I've been the recipient of some bulbs. Yes.
you, including you,
Okay.
bulbs have all the food in them already.
Mm-hmm.
So people think, well, everything's dead, you can't plant now. Oh, yes, you can plant bulbs. Until you yourself can't dig into the ground because
Until
it's
the
too
ground
frozen.
freezes.
Right, because all that food's in the bulb. It sits in the winter.
Mhm.
When it warms up and it comes up,
Mhm.
it will make its flower because of all the stuff inside the bulb.
Right.
It
And
doesn't need to
benefits-
go anywhere, too many other places. So a little bit of roots.
benefits from being watered still, as long as the soil will take the water.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And we'll get,
Yes.
but we have enough thaws in the winter that usually gets watered during the winter. And then when the bulbs go by, you let the leaves turn brown. You don't cut them off when the flowers are done. All those leaves, as they turn brown, are going back into the bulb. All the nutrients of the plant are going back into the bulb.
Mhm.
Then when they're done, you can plant some other flowers. Some ground covers or some other flowers. But you have to be very careful if you're in a tree well with a tree
Okay.
to respect the roots. And I can talk
Right,
more about that
right.
if you want.
Mhm. And some trees have more intense root systems than others that you can
Right,
work around.
right. Now there's some interesting details about that. You probably cannot plant in a tree well with a maple because
Okay.
they're fibrous, thick roots. And it's not because you're really going to hurt the maple, because they're tough. You can break a lot of roots and it's still going to be fine, even a street tree. But it's just too hard for you to get anywhere in there.
Okay.
But some trees, especially when they're older, are surprisingly good places. If there's enough soil for 3 or 4 inches, the tree is so big it's already gone even whether it's in the sewer system or into somebody's yard, it's got its water system established, and you can plant around the base of a large tree. A good example of this is about 174 Columbia Street, where I prepared the soil, nothing in there yet, but I prepared the soil and discovered this big tree. There's a nice perimeter of 6 inches, 8 inches that's deep enough to plant beautiful things. Not a single root. But on the other hand, if you're planting under a magnolia tree, quite fibrous, and I use a very fine tool so that I don't break roots. And I sort of nudge it down there with some, so you have to be careful.
Now, I've noticed on Columbia Street and Bishop Allen some beautiful sunflowers. Do you plant those? Or?
Nope.
Okay.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was Linda.
Okay.
And that is a triply interesting place. First of all, I screened that with about 3 or 4 other people, and we dug down and we got the old tree stump and we got buried trash and debris, and we brought in free compost from the city.
Okay.
And one of the ways
That's
the
a
city
good resource.
cooperates is compost that's really good to put in your garden, whether sidewalk or your private garden too. And I want to talk about cooperation with the city, because I've met with officials from the Parks Department and the DPW street people and the
They're
tree
wonderfully
people.
supportive in
So
the
they
city
like the
of
idea,
Cambridge, yes.
and we cooperate with them in
Mhm.
turn. There's interesting details about how that works. But at 85 Bishop Allen Drive, where the sunflowers were,
Okay.
they are filling the space this year, but we've also talked with the people from the St. Paul AME Church. And these good folks also run the Christian Life Center, which is in 85. And they want to plant a fig tree, because the fig tree is biblical.
Mhm.
So I said, awesome, that we're doing this for you. We want to build this up.
On the
And
sidewalk, a fig tree on
in
the
the-
sidewalk.
that's
Don't they
right.
spread out like really far? Fig
I
trees?
don't know too much about them,
Oh.
except I think they have to be wrapped or protected because they're not really cold weather
Right.
trees. But it's a really cool idea. So I think they're planning to do a fig tree.
I want to see that one. That'll be different.
That's
Yes.
that makes me happy, because that's the kind of thing makes me feel like this is worth doing. And meanwhile, the sunflowers fascinated the kids with
Mhm.
all their
They're
seeds.
beautiful.
And people came by and
yeah.
said, "Wow!" So it's a double benefit just from one tree row. Because next year
Right.
it'll be a fig tree.
And they seem really sturdy out there on the sidewalk. I'm impressed with their sturdy look.
And people have choice.
Mhm.
People can replace the sunflowers with something else,
Yeah.
and express themselves in their unique individual ways
Mhm.
of contributing to the community. Or a group of people can get together. In fact, that gets into another thing about how we can do this, either individually where you live, adopt a tree well or two,
Right.
taking care of the weeds as well,
Right.
Or you might get together a group of people and work up and down your block and help each other out.
Right. And that watering is so important. I think sometimes even people who pay someone to put in plants forget to follow up with the watering, and the plants really need it, especially the first year, to maintain their health.
And here's another interesting city resident connection. If you're careless and you plant too roughly, say your summer annuals, you have to be careful of the roots. On the other hand, if you're watering, the tree benefits from your watering, and that's good for the trees as well as the beauty of the tree well, which is already beautiful with a tree. The city will usually put a tree in at the request of an abutting property owner who must agree to water it and take care of it. But it's on a kind of a waiting basis. In fact, on Thursday, I'm scheduled to go to the DPW tree people and find out what kind of trees might be in line for Area 4, which is where this whole thing is happening. So that if a tree is going to go in here, we like to know about it so that we cooperate, we don't get in the way, and so on. But meanwhile, tree wells can be gorgeous without trees. Let me suggest, for example, if you're walking around the neighborhood, go to 23, right now, 23 Market Street, where Sophia has put a gorgeous garden of marigolds, and another tree well that we screened out, because once you've screened out all the debris and the rocks, it's so inviting to dive in that people are twice as likely or more to do it.
Right. And I also know that the City of Cambridge will replace a tree. If a tree is in front of your house and it dies and they take it down, you automatically get a free replacement tree, which is very nice.
Although I don't know how long it takes. I think they're trying to figure that out.
Sometimes one season, I think. If you sign up, it's the next season.
Well, I'll say we have a very good arborist named David Lefcourt, and he had a good tree planter named Dick Woods. And these guys put in, I don't want to use the wrong number, but I just met them. It might have been 600 or 800 trees last year.
Really?
Just in 2008.
Really?
And they've got, I think, 200 estimated scheduled for the first half of 2009. I just don't know how many of those are going to be in Area 4 yet. I'm going to go begin to find out, location by location.
And I know also if anybody has an idea of planting some park trees that park flowers, they will supply the flowers. Like a few years ago, we did a daffodil garden in Washington. What used to be Washington Park is now Clement Morgan Park, and they supplied all the daffodils for that. And they come back year after year, so it's nice. If you have a creative idea, you want to improve your neighborhood, you can just call the DPW, and they will be very helpful.
Well, we've had some donations from them, and also because our effort is an independent community effort, and we have donations from ourselves. Like various neighbors have given me money to buy bulbs, and I've chipped in, and some other people have chipped in some actual bulbs that they bought themselves to put in. So, because it's not a city program, what we're doing here, it's an independent community effort, and we cooperate with the city, and the city is cooperating with us.
Right. And I find that gardening in Cambridge is a very social endeavor. I grew up in the suburbs, and I loved to garden always, but it was a very solitary activity when I was out there. And in the city, I find that you always bump into people who take an interest in what you're doing. They'll stop and they'll say, "Oh, isn't that nice? Look at what you're doing, and what kind of thing are you planting?" And it draws people, and people appreciate that you're trying to make things more beautiful, and like to see you working and improving things.
Well, that's another, thank you, Sharon, because the idea of being able to build a community around taking responsibility for our own sidewalks, that's why it's not a city program. It's because when people come from the heart and get together and get to know each other and take responsibility for their sidewalks, you can feel the difference just walking home. And actually, if the city did all the things that we're hoping the independent community effort on sidewalk gardens could do, the taxes would be probably, there's just not enough labor power to go around and pull every weed and
So it's
plant
value
everything.
added.
Right. But it's all worth it all by itself to be able to build your own community, heart from the heart, neighbor to neighbor. Which on this sheet here, I was listing some of the ideas. You've already read it now, I guess.
It had a long
because
time
of the
to
beginning of
read
the
it.
show. But let's see. So let's take care of our sidewalks together. And that involves pulling the weeds too, of course. I can't go around and pull everybody's weeds for all the time in the future. So but I thought that if I did enough work, people could notice what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll remind me to talk about noticing after we go through this list.
Okay.
Because there's something about noticing that's very special.
Okay.
Okay, Home Streets Sidewalk Garden. It's just a name I thought maybe we could call it. But if people want to put in their oar with their ideas, it hasn't really been born yet. We can start something together. And so I really want to hear what people think would work to make a good program of community building around the sidewalks. So what we have here is tending our sidewalks. And the idea is also we can meet people in the process, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
New faces, a whole lot of different kind of neighbors. Because all along, we go in our familiar pathways, like with like. But, we live right next door to each other, down the street.
It's space intensive.
Man.
Cambridge is a very closely packed place, but there's lots of details everywhere. And this kind of adding flowers just, you do notice it. You do notice it in your daily walks, and it makes your experience of walking around better as you go back and forth to work. If you're one of the many people who walk to work every day, it'll improve your commute, your walking commute.
Right.
And so what do you suggest if people have never gardened or want to get involved to help? Can they contact you?
Yes. There we go. The bottom of this sheet. There's my email. Can you read the blue?
CUZZIN7@earthlink.net.
And my phone number.
Okay.
Right.
617-661-8092 for Hatch Sterritt.
Right. So the thing about noticing I want to add, I'm keeping a list of all the different reactions that people have had. There's 33 of them so far.
Really?
Some of them think I'm crazy. Some of them think I'm doing God's work. Some say, well, no, you shouldn't do other people's work for them. Some people say, yeah, this can help bring people together and build a community. Some people think, you have some kind of a problem. You need to have your head examined. So there's quite a variety of reactions. I'm thinking of writing a poem about it. But the thing about noticing I want to say is that one reaction was, well, all these weeds, it's just grass to me. And sometimes if you're just going home from work or school, you don't notice because the streets are just some place to get through when you're going there. So you don't notice much of anything. If it's dramatically beautiful or dramatically messy, you might notice. So if the weeds have been pulled, sometimes you will come upon it and think, if you even notice it all, you'll think, well, there just didn't happen to be very many weeds here. But so you didn't see the before and after. But if you're in a noticing place, you notice that there are fewer weeds and there's potential for doing nice things together along the sidewalks and in the tree wells. And you have the feeling that somebody cares along here.
Yes, the cared for look. Yes,
being cared for.
It's very important.
So, but that only happens if you notice first. You have to notice.
And I think people appreciate when they notice too.
And then you build on noticing, because if you notice the streets, you can notice each other in a more sensitive way as well. And if you're doing things together, you don't have to get into great detail, but just get a little bit larger comfort zone and get to know your neighbors a bit more. And this is a good way to do that.
And do you think they do this in other parts of Cambridge, maybe? Or have you heard of
Well,
similar efforts?
there is one person in one other neighborhood who when I met a tree planting committee. And I described the Home Streets idea and asked if anyone else was doing this in other parts of Cambridge. And the answer was a resounding no. I said, well, I'm glad but people are advocating for trees, which is awesome.
Yes.
One member of the committee did say that they had an effort in her neighborhood. So where we are right now is I'm waiting to hear from her some of the details about that. Because what we're doing here, it's definitely exportable.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Contagious.
Yes.
I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because most communities can benefit from becoming more real communities, palpable, face-to-face communities, and this is one way to help make that happen.
That sounds really cool.
In fact, on the list here, see what else. Talking points. You know, they tell me, you got to get your elevator speech together. Elevator speech together. Are we off?
No, we're fine.
Yeah, okay. The monitor. Okay. The elevator speech is the very quick summary of what you're doing that explains to somebody who wants to know, what is this? What is Home Streets? So I made this little sheet to have kind of an elevator speech, because you only have a minute to talk to somebody and then they're gone.
Okay.
So it was caring for our sidewalks together and meeting all of our neighbors and our new faces along the way. And the second, what is it? It's planting flowers and ground covers and removing the weeds and trash. Also the weeds and trash.
Mm-hmm.
And even right now, get this, the leaves are falling all over the place.
Right.
But if the snow falls now, we're going to have muck all winter long.
Right.
Because the street sweeper is scheduled to come in December, but if the snow beats it, the days when there's snow, the street sweeper doesn't come to your neighborhood. And that's it, the schedule's over.
Right.
So if we don't get rid of those leaves,
Right.
we're going to have muck, and it's going to
December
be dirt
last
all over the
chance for
sidewalk.
the street sweeper.
So you ought to get out right now and
Right.
bag those. It's cold out there, so the
You
snow.
reminded me.
The
I
snow
won't
could
forget,
come
I
any minute.
promise.
Right. So it's not just weeds and trash,
Okay,
but
yep.
even leaves.
Okay.
And it can be in tree wells with or without trees, and it can be we have donated bulbs now.
Okay.
And you could also plant them right on the edge of your property line, including if you're a tenant.
Very nice.
Coordinate with your landlord, and there's often just a little bit of
5
soil
seconds.
by the fence. Okay, and you'll feel the difference going home every day.